Hello everyone, I'm Riya Gandhi and welcome back to my channel. As promised in the previous video, I'm back again with yet another video on Edward Said's Orientalism. But this video is very much different to what we have been discussing so far. In this video, we are actually going to apply Edward Said's Orientalist theory to one of the most canonical works in English literature. And that is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So when we talk about Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, it is considered to be one of the most important works in English literature and inevitably for UGC NET English exam. Most of the literature students would have come across that work in their curriculum or would have studied it for their NET exam. The reason why it is so important, the reason why it is so relevant even today, because it sparks debate about the way things are represented in the work, right? It's not just a simple story about a European man traveling far into Africa, right? It's more than that. And that's what we are going to unpack today in this video. So make sure you stick around till the end of this video and don't forget to make notes. Now, before we dive straight into the work, let's first do a quick recap of what Orientalism is all about. As we discussed in the video last time, Orientalism, according to Edward Said, is a notion, right, is a way for the West to sort of construct a very distorted, a very different version of the East in a way that justifies their colonial control. So one of the most popular ways that West did that previously was to portray the East in an exotic, as a primitive section of the society, as raw, as uncivilized, as mysterious, right? So by creating this kind of image of the East as exotic, mysterious, and so on and so forth, they sort of otherized, right? They sort of otherized the East so that they can control and dominate, right? So this was the entire notion of Orientalism. Not just that, but we also discussed two kinds of Orientalism specifically. What were those two kinds of Orientalism? The first one was latent Orientalism, basically the deep-rooted, unconscious stereotypes that the West harbors about the East. And the second is manifest Orientalism, right? How these deep-rooted, how these unconscious stereotypes, how they are showcased, how they are portrayed in policies, in popular representations in media and culture and writings, stuff like that, right? So if you want to know more about Orientalism in detail, then you can watch my previous video if you haven't watched it yet. When we are talking about Heart of Darkness, these are some of the basic facts that you should know prior. First of all, this is a novella written by Joseph Conrad and published in 1899. It is considered to be one of the classical, the canonical works of English literature. It is often studied for its narrative style, for its exploratory narratives, for its symbolism, etc. Right? But one of the most interesting things that I find about this novel is that initially when it was published, a lot of critics believed that this novel is anti-colonial, right? It talks about the horrors of imperialism, it talks about the horrors of colonial practices. But then you have post-colonial critiques like Edward Said, post-colonial critiques like Chinua Achebe, who point out that this novel is actually reinforcing the colonial stereotypes. So how is it possible? How can a novella be critiquing colonialism but at the same time reinforcing the colonial stereotypes? That explains why this novel is so relevant even today. It sparks so many insightful, critical discussions in the classrooms, right, in conference halls, and that is why it's important for you to study. So, for those who are not aware about it, for those who are not yet acquainted with Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, here's a brief summary for you all. Right? So when I'm talking about the novella, it is framed as a story told by Charles Marlowe. Right? So it is a story within a story. Right? So Charles Marlowe was a sailor, and the book begins wherein he sort of narrates this story of exploration, his story of exploring Africa to his friends on a boat in London. Right? So he talks about his journey of going to Congo, which was then controlled by Belgium, right? Because he wanted to find a man called as Kurtz, who was a brilliant ivory trader. Now, on his way, Marlowe sort of witnesses the horrors of and the brutal scenes of colonial exploitation, wherein you see African laborers being chained together, their bodies by the roadside, company agents being extremely corrupt during that point of time, fueled by this profit-driven mindset. In that entire journey, when he finally meets Kurtz towards the end, what Marlowe sees is that Kurtz is completely corrupt, right? He's not a noble genius of sorts as he was reputed to be, right? But someone who has lost all moral restraint. He is Kurtz, that is, he's ruling over the local people like a god. He is surrounded by violence and worship at the same time. And that's what, towards the end. Now, these are the very words, like while he is dying, the words that he says, it sort of explains the entire theme of this novel. And this question, I think, was also asked in GATE exam, and I think it was also asked in UGC NET exam as well. While he was dying, Kurtz said, the horror, which explains everything, right? Especially in terms of the colonial ideals, which sort of catapulted everything into madness and chaos. So this was the brief summary of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. I would definitely suggest you to go ahead and read the book. It's a short novel, it's a novella, so it wouldn't take much of your time. Because when you will read it, you will understand why it is so critical. You'll understand why it is so important. And if you have already read it, I would love to know your thoughts about it. So please mention it in the comments section below. Right. Having said that, now let's apply Said's Orientalist theory to this particular text. So first of all, when you are applying any theory to a text, the first thing that you should always take a note of is the title, right? Be it a poem's title or the title of a novel, right? Over here we have Heart of Darkness. Now, if you put this title in the context of postcolonial theory or Orientalist theory, you're bound to ask that question to yourself as why this title? Why is it called as Heart of Darkness? Why dark? Right? So it's from the very beginning, especially it's from the very title itself that we have or we are provided with this notion of something that is dark, something that is mysterious, possibly exotic in some or the other way, right? So take a note of this, take a note of the title and understand or question yourself as to why would Joseph Conrad title this novel as Heart of Darkness? We all know that the location is in Africa. Why did he feel the need to sort of like highlight that, right? Now, then you begin with the novel. When you talk about the novel, as I've mentioned previously as well, it is a story within a story, wherein Charles Marlowe is narrating his journey to Congo to his friends on a boat in London, right? Now, when he describes Congo, when he describes the Congo jungle as something as dark green, something as almost black, imagine the kind of contrast that is represented over here, wherein Congo is represented as dark green, the jungles are thick and sort of like black and stuff like that, and contrast it to the very beginning of the novel, wherein he is narrating his story to his friends on a boat in London, right? A very bright context, a very light, friendly atmosphere. And the moment he talks about and narrates his story and his journey to Congo, slowly and gradually it becomes darker. It becomes more mysterious. So it's from the very beginning of the novel, from the title of the novel and the very beginning of the novel, that we see the contrast. This very stark contrast that is layered subtly, right? So the land is portrayed to be mysterious, it's portrayed to be hostile, the Congo jungle, right? Something that does not have a living environment, something that has no culture or no history. I would like to read a section from the book. It basically begins with, going up that river was like traveling back to the earliest beginnings of the world, when vegetation rioted on the earth and the big trees were kings. What is the one word that strikes your mind when you basically hear or read this sentence? It's taking us back to a sort of a primitive world, don't you think? Wherein Conrad is describing Congo jungle through the mouth of Marlowe, of course, as something that's very primitive, as something that's way back in time, right? That is again creating and reinforcing a stereotypical representation of the other, of Africa. So in a way, it is a kind of latent Orientalism, a form of latent Orientalism that talks about the deep-seated beliefs, the unconscious beliefs that Marlowe perhaps might have had about Africa, right? Something that's unknowable, but also very deeply rooted in Marlowe's mind. Then you talk about representation, right? You talk about how Africans in the novel are represented. So the way that he has represented, it's again very dehumanizing, right? So what you see is that there are chained laborers with iron collars around their necks. He equates the African laborers as shadows, right? So when you talk about shadow, which means you are essentially stripping someone of their human essence, of their human existence, right? Calling them as shapes, as black shapes who are crouched, who are lying down, right? Providing them with labels, with voices, again creating and elucidating a very, very exotic, a very, very mysterious kind of vibe, right? And this is the point when you sort of question, like, is it anti-colonial novel or is it actually reinforcing certain cultural stereotypes? You repeatedly question yourself every time you read the kind of, the manner in which Conrad has represented the Africans, right? So definitely here you can talk about the otherization of Orientalism, wherein the other is depicted as someone who is voiceless, someone who is primitive, someone who is inferior, someone who is exotic, mysterious, so that the Europeans can appear as civilized, can appear as superior, right? Again, I'd like to read one of the very, very important quotes, something that struck me. It's from the novel itself, wherein one of the characters is saying, "Your strength is just an accident arising from the weakness of others." Such a powerful quote, don't you think? How you can sort of establish your superiority by pulling someone down. You can sort of establish your leadership, your power by dimming someone else's light. So, as per our Orientalist theory and Orientalist notions, you can say that Conrad is creating this stark contrast. He uses this symbolism to talk about this Occident and Orient dichotomy. Occident, the West, Orient, the East. Right? So in this entire novella, Africans are often compared to animals, darkness, shadows, unhappy savages, to portray Europeans as civilized, as purposeful. So how do you understand this dichotomy? Take a quick look at how they are described, right? In the sense that how their appearance is described. For example, we discussed how the Africans are described as savages and basically shadows, right? Europeans are described to wear, the European characters are described to wear snowy trousers, transparent necktie, and varnished boots. What kind of image does it create in your mind? Something that's very clean, pure, polished, orderly, sophisticated, right? So again, the way in which he has described, the way in which Conrad has attributed certain appearances and certain certain kind of clothes to each and every character reinforces this dichotomy, reinforces certain cultural stereotypes, colonial stereotypes. So all in all, knowingly or unknowingly, what Conrad did was he aligned his language with Orientalist discourse. He aligned the language that he used in the novel with the Orientalist discourse. How Africa is portrayed as a sort of a silent backdrop. It does not have a voice. The Africans in this novel, they don't have a voice. They do not have any kind of dignity. They are portrayed as primitive. They are portrayed as savages, right? So it definitely aligns with the Orientalist discourse. So to sum it up, you can say that this entire novel, Heart of Darkness, is an amalgamation of the latent Orientalist assumptions, right? How there are certain deeply rooted unconscious notions that the West harbors, right, of the East, in this case Africa, right, where Africans are depicted as silent, as savage, and the European characters are identified with their appearance, and in their appearance are the coded messages of orderliness, of sophistication, of purity, and how that they can use to reinforce colonial domination, right? So coming back to the title of the novel again, once again, you talk about the heart of darkness, right? It can literally mean the African jungle, and metaphorically talk about the darkness of the African continent, right? That the European sort of mindset harbors. Now, so when we are talking about how to apply the Orientalist theory, to quickly sum it up, the entire process that we followed right now. So first we started off with the title, right? Then we talked about the beginning. And then slowly and gradually, we talked about the geographical locations and how with the geographical locations, you sort of establish the dichotomy, right? You sort of establish the contrast, the contrast of the ways in which Congo is represented and how London, or how you can say the European characters are represented. Then we talk about the representation of the African characters and how that is also in stark contrast to the European characters, right? And then we come back and sum it up with the title once again. Now, this was a process that we followed. While you're writing an answer or while you're writing a research paper, you can definitely go more into detail. So with this, we now come to an end of our video. Let me ask you one quick and final question. What do we learn by applying Orientalism to Heart of Darkness? We definitely learn that it's a very layered and a complex narrative, something that would definitely not have black and white answers to it. We will be dealing in those gray areas right now, right? Ultimately, we realize that Heart of Darkness is not just a simple story of someone journeying into Africa. It is a story about how colonial literature sort of constructs the other. And that makes it a powerful, yes, problematic text for Orientalist analysis, for post-colonial analysis, right? If you are a UGC NET English aspirant or an English literature student, then this video is definitely going to help you in applying and understanding how literary theory works in practice, right? You understand the main tenets of Orientalism and how you can apply these tenets to Heart of Darkness. Now, if this video helped you, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments, do you think Conrad was critiquing colonialism or was he reinforcing the colonial stereotypes? I'd love to hear your thoughts.